All right, everybody, here we go. You know what I saw today? I saw Donald Trump. Yes, that Donald Trump go live on air and threaten his own party in front of millions of people. That's right. You heard me correctly. A president of the United States, the same guy who once bragged he could control the GOP with a snap of his fingers, stood right there in the studio and pointed straight into the camera like he was menacing a bunch of day players on a cheap reality show. Look, I've seen a lot in my time. I've watched bizarre press conferences, incoherent speeches, debate nights that felt less believable than fiction, but never, even in my wildest imagination, did I think I'd live to see the day a president has to go on live television to scream at his own allies. That's the kind of scene I'd reject if a writer brought it to me too ridiculous, too on the nose, too pathetic. Yet here we are, living in a reality stranger than anything Hollywood would greenlight. And before we dive into that chaos, let me address the elephant in the room, because I know the internet is on fire today. There are rumors going around that Trump lost it because he was tired, exhausted, or some mysterious reason that made him look unsteady on air. Okay, folks, I'm all for calling things as they are, but let's keep it real. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't falling asleep. There was no mysterious incident. The man was completely lucid. Unfortunately for anyone hoping for a more comforting explanation. Now, did he wish he was anywhere else rather than standing there yelling at the camera? Absolutely. But the fact remains, he created that moment all by himself. What Trump did on that broadcast wasn't leadership. It wasn't politics. It was a man in full-blown panic, demanding that Republican senators fall in line, and then just seconds later, admitting out loud what Washington has been waiting years to hear: maybe it's over. And folks, let me tell you, that moment is where tonight's story begins. What makes that moment so much more disturbing isn't just that Trump was yelling at the camera, it's how he did it. If you watch the clip closely, you'll see this wasn't some spontaneous outburst. It felt like a preview of the panic simmering inside an entire movement he once controlled. Look around the country right now. People are still struggling with prices that climb every week, medical bills that force families to split pills, and a healthcare system stretched to the breaking point. Politics is exhausted and divided. At the exact moment when people need a little calm, a little responsibility, Trump chooses this time to go live and demand personal loyalty, not solutions, no vision, no economic plan. He demanded Republican senators break rules, bend procedures, and clear the path for his own power grabs. And the most telling part, he did it with the urgency of a man who knows he's losing control. Go back and look at his face. The eyes darting, the voice coming in jagged bursts, the hand shaking as he tried to point at some invisible traitor keeping him up at night. What we saw wasn't strength, it was fear, not authority, desperation. And when he screamed for the GOP to fall in line, not one of them answered. Not one party power broker spoke up in support. A few even shook their heads on camera. That was the climax of 3 years of chaos. He publicly threatened his own lawmakers, publicly pressured them to abandon principles they swore to defend, and publicly unraveled when he realized the people who once feared him no longer do. Pay attention to the second after that threat. Trump froze for 1 second, just 1 second, and then said the words we never thought we'd hear from him: maybe it's over. Those aren't the words of a man still in charge. Those are the words of a man watching power slip through his fingers faster than he can grab it back. And that leads us to the big question: why does a president once celebrated by his party have to threaten that same party on live television? The answer is the truth Trump can't hide anymore. Power is leaving him, and he knows it. And while we're talking about Trump losing it on live TV, I want to show you a completely contrasting image, one that to me perfectly illustrates the difference between real leadership and someone desperately clinging to a throne that's been wobbly for years. I'm talking about Senator Mark Kelly. If you saw Kelly's speech this week, you saw him standing calmly at the podium, light hitting a steady face, delivering the line without trembling, without snarling, without rage. Nobody's going to silence me. Not the kind of line shouted out of fear or desperation, but the statement of someone who's been through things most of us can't imagine. And what makes those words so powerful is the context of Kelly's life. Remember, while Trump was obsessing over inauguration crowd sizes or holding press conferences about trivialities, Kelly was on missions where lives depended on every decision, missions on space shuttles outside the atmosphere where there's no room for impulsiveness. While Trump was addicted to social media food fights, Kelly was commanding complex NASA systems where every move had to be perfect and every crew member had to trust each other completely. And while Trump spent years nursing political grudges, Kelly was shoulder to shoulder with U.S. military forces in environments where the smallest mistake could cost a teammate their life. I bring this up to write poetry about Kelly, but to highlight the contrast America is seeing clearer than ever. In the moment Trump was screaming on live TV, threatening his allies like someone trashing the room because he knows he's about to be kicked out, Kelly only needed a few calm sentences to expose the difference between a leader and someone so terrified of losing power he's lost his mind. Kelly didn't have to yell. He didn't have to point fingers. He didn't have to threaten anyone because he understands what Trump never has. Real strength isn't measured in volume. It's measured in credibility. It doesn't come from coercion. It comes from people trusting you because of what you've done, not what you threatened to do. And more importantly, Kelly knows exactly how to deal with someone like Trump. He doesn't get dragged into the chaos, doesn't react emotionally, doesn't let threats shake him. He stands steady like an astronaut has to when everything around him is shaking. I bring this up because at a time when America is facing deep political instability, unprecedented polarization, and a president screaming to hold on to influence that's already gone, Kelly shows up as a quiet reminder of what actual maturity looks like. In a moment when America is this turbulent, when the political storm is spinning harder every day, who do you want at the helm? Someone panicking and yelling? Or someone calm, looking the problem in the eye and saying, nobody's going to silence me? If we want to understand why Trump exploded on live TV like that, we don't have to look far. Just look at the latest numbers. Because no matter how loud Trump yells, data is data. And the data is speaking very clearly. He's sliding faster, deeper, and more dangerously than at any point since he entered politics. National polls over the last 6 weeks show Trump's approval has dropped a total of 11 points to just 38%, while disapproval has climbed to 56%. The scary part isn't just the number, it's the trend, steady decline, no bottom, no rebound. That's the kind of downward curve any political operation would call a nightmare. But what's really panicking GOP strategists isn't the national number. It's what's happening in the deep red strongholds. The places Trump used to win by landslides, the places he treated as his guaranteed power base. And now those strongholds are cracking. Take Redding County, South Carolina. Trump won it by 21 points in 2020. Last week's poll has that margin down to 8 points. 8 points in a place where just saying Trump's name used to bring out red flags like it was the 4th of July. Or Dalton County, Georgia, Trump won by 18. Now he leads by 4, a drop so steep that local party officials are admitting this isn't Trump country anymore. And that brings us to the truth Trump fears most. He's not afraid of losing to the other side. He's afraid of losing to his own party. Because Trump knows better than anyone that without the GOP machine, without the party infrastructure, without the traditional loyalist voters shielding him, his political career is just a memory. Why are GOP voters walking away? The question matters, and the answer is simpler than people think. First, the chaos. 3 straight years of self-inflicted crises, Pointless political theater, turning everything into a personal vendetta. Plenty of longtime Republican voters are simply exhausted. They want their party to win, not to star in a reality show. Second, veterans, the group once considered the backbone of the GOP. They don't like being used as political props. Veterans organizations in Arizona, Nevada, and Texas are reporting 15 to 22-point drops in Trump support, numbers any analyst knows spell red alert. Third, independents and suburban voters, the ones who gave Trump a chance in 2016, have completely turned away. They're done with a president who makes them cringe every time they turn on the news. Fourth, young voters. They don't just dislike Trump. They see him as the symbol of an old, broken, hyper-divided system. Imagine how Trump felt looking at those numbers right before that live broadcast. That's the ghost following him onto the stage. The ghost of truth, the ghost of decline. When he screamed at the camera demanding the GOP fall in line, those numbers, the numbers that don't lie, were weighing on his shoulders. And when he blurted out, "Maybe it's over," that wasn't a slip, that was fear. Fear fed by every chart, every poll, every downward trend his team has to show him every morning. Some of you might ask, has this ever happened before? There's only one close parallel, though not identical: Richard Nixon in his final year. The difference is Nixon collapsed in private, while Trump collapses on live television. Nixon fought the pressure behind closed doors. Trump fights it by screaming into a camera. Nixon left office knowing he had no path left. Trump hasn't left yet, but the paths around him are narrowing by the day. Trump isn't just losing in the polls. He's losing the war to control the very party he once forced to bow to him. And that truth, not the media, not Democrats, not some conspiracy, is what just pushed him to the edge of panic. The entire country watched on live TV. All of that data brings us to the central question: why did Trump explode on live television and aim his rage directly at Republican senators? The answer, like so many things with Trump, isn't about policy or ideology. It's about power, personal power. In that live broadcast, as his voice kept rising like an overpressurized boiler about to blow, Trump demanded that the GOP clear the way for him, and that meant one thing: abolish the filibuster. To him, the filibuster isn't a legislative procedure, isn't a check on majority power. No. In Trump's eyes, the filibuster is nothing more than an obstacle between him and total control. Because if the filibuster disappears under a president determined to expand his own authority, almost no limits remain. A president could then ram through election law changes of his choosing, restructure the judiciary, create mechanisms to stay in power longer than the Constitution allows. That's what Trump wants, and that's what he demanded from the GOP in that furious broadcast. Trump doesn't want laws. Trump wants power, and when someone wants power more than he wants law, the rule of law itself becomes the first target. And if it were only about the filibuster, maybe the GOP wouldn't have recoiled so hard. But at the exact same moment Trump was pressuring his own party, another scandal erupted, one involving the military at the worst possible time. This week, the Pentagon confirmed that an internal investigation is examining an order allegedly issued by Trump in his final year in office, a directive that reportedly told Special Operations Forces to conduct an operation that exceeded legal boundaries, to ignore standard rules of engagement, and to eliminate all targets at any cost. The people who pushed back against that order weren't journalists, weren't Democrats. They were senior military commanders, the very generals who told investigators that carrying it out would have violated international laws of war. One general is quoted in the probe's report as saying that was not a lawful order. That was the order of a man who either doesn't understand or doesn't care about the limits the law places on his power. When those revelations resurfaced the same week Trump unraveled on live TV, the picture became clearer than ever: a leader demanding the system bend to one man. A party fractured and deeply skeptical, and a legal and institutional framework struggling to hold the line against someone who sees the law as a barrier to be torn down. The tension inside the GOP right now isn't just about collapsing poll numbers. It's the fear that says if we hand power back to Trump, will he break the entire system just to keep his chair? And that is exactly why most Republican senators stayed silent when he screamed at them on live television. Not because they didn't hear him, because they understood all too well what he was asking. They know that demand doesn't just help Trump, it threatens the entire power structure of Congress itself. And then at the peak of his rage, voice hoarse, hands still shaking with anger, Trump let slip the sentence no one expected, "Maybe it's over." A small sentence, almost whispered. But for a man obsessed with power, it was a confession louder than any scandal. That's the moment that takes us back to the live clip the entire country saw, the moment Trump just stopped. He seemed to forget he was in front of a camera, forget millions were watching, forget the character he'd been playing for years. He froze, eyes down, lips moving slightly, and then those words came out like a heavy exhale. "Maybe it's over." So quiet that if you blinked, you might have missed it. That wasn't a slip of the tongue, wasn't distraction, wasn't a momentary lapse. That was the truth slipping out. The truth he's already seen in the polls, in the GOP's reaction, in the cold stares from senators who once stood loyally behind him. Trump wasn't just admitting defeat, he was admitting his greatest fear. Power has left him. And when you list what he's lost, the picture gets stark. He's lost the Republican Party because it no longer runs on fear of Trump. It runs on fear of losing voters. He's lost key lawmakers who once backed him not out of belief but out of fear of the MAGA mob. Now they know protecting him could end their own careers. He's lost traditional GOP voters who want to win elections, want stability, want policy, not a permanent supporting role in one man's endless personal crisis. And most importantly, Trump has lost the fear he once inspired, that invisible force that made senators snap to attention whenever he walked into the room. All of it vanished in that broadcast, the moment he confessed out loud what no one thought he'd ever say. Washington's reaction when that moment aired was instant. Newsrooms went quiet. Political aides exchanged looks of disbelief. Some Republican lawmakers, yes, Republicans, texted reporters that this could be the real breaking point. The moment even Trump understands the road ahead is no longer carpeted in red. When I watch that clip over and over, I don't see a man fighting for a future. I see a man looking backward, trying to hold on to an era of power that, on that day on live television, slipped away for good. A real leader never has to threaten his own people, never has to scream, never has to sound desperate. A real leader isn't defined by how much people fear him, but by how much they believe in him. And that is what Trump no longer has. When a movement built on fear loses that fear, the movement collapses. When a leader built on projected dominance loses that dominance, he falls. So the only question left is, what will America do with this moment of truth we just witnessed? Because we have now seen what Trump always tried to hide the instant he admitted defeat, not in a letter, not in an investigation, but on live television. And that may be the very moment that marks the end of an era of chaos and opens the next big question: where does America go when it is no longer held hostage by the screams of a man terrified of losing power? Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this helpful, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdowns. See you tomorrow when we'll keep decoding what's really happening in Washington.